today we are going to learn what are loops. Okay, so let us learn what are loops. What are loops? So let us say you have given a job to okay, so let me just put it this way. So your faculty basically has asked to um, okay, so asked to collect all the records from your class, right? So you will have around say 50 students in a class. So your faculty has told you go collect the record from each one. So what are you doing there? So there is a student one. What do you do? Go collect a card, collect record. So as
Okay.
a teacher, I have told go collect records from each student, and there are like 50 students. You went to a student one and you are collecting a record. So you go to student two, what will you do? You again do the same thing, collect a record. Student three. So what are you doing? You are doing the same job multiple times. Yes. Until you reach 50th student, until you reach 50th student. Yes or no? So what you are predominantly doing here is you are going to each student and collecting a record, collecting a record. So it is the same statement. It is the same instruction that you are executing with every student. You go to a student one, collect a record. You go to student two, collect a record. You go to student three, collect a record. It is the same instruction. What is it? Collect a record. Collect a record is your instruction. So you are executing the same instruction multiple times until you reach the end, until you complete it with all the students. So what you are doing is here, you are running in a loop where you're doing the same job again and again, again and again, but with a different student, right? Right. So in the same way, in programming, loops are something where we want to execute same block of statements multiple times. Same block of statement multiple times. Execute set of statements. A set of statements multiple times. Okay. I want to execute set of statements multiple times. Then that is where we use the power of loops. Okay, that is where we want to use the loops, right? So when we want to remember clearly, right, when we want to execute set of statements multiple times, set of statements multiple times, we use loops. We use loops. Now, for example, here, let me just tell, what I want to do is I want to take a user input and I want to take a user input value 1, value 2, and I want to say print the sum of those two values. Print sum of those two values. And I want to do that for 10 times. I want to do that for 10 times. So what do I mean by that? A is equal to input of enter value A, enter value. Let me just keep it that way. And I'm going to say B is equal to enter value. And whatever it is, the outcome of it, f of entered value sum is A plus B. Okay, now I want to take this user input for 10 times. So I want to repeat the same statement for 10 times, right? So what I'll do, if let us say I don't have a loops, So what I'll do is I'm going to repeat the statement 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So here since I want to execute the same set of statements for 10 times, I'm repeating the same set of statements for 10 times. Yes. Now that way I can just achieve this. Done. First time it is done. Right. So it is sum is like basically since it is a string, it is giving that as an output. Let me stop it and I am going to. Okay, so I'm just to Control Z. Okay, if you don't want the code that you have pasted not to be present, so you can just do Control Z. So it is undo. So I'll just convert my first statement to integer. So how do I convert it to integer? So int function will basically help us to convert it to integer, and then we can do the sum. So now I have repeated the same set of statements for 10 times. And now if I execute this, right, enter value, I'm just going to say 10 and 20, the output is 30, 30, and 40, the output is 70, and so on. Until I complete my set of statements, it will still keep asking. Now, all the execution of the 10 statements is completed, and then the program execution is completed. Okay. Now, what we did it for same operation, it is the same operation, right? Since I wanted to do it 10 times, I have repeated the same piece of code 10 times. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Now, what if there was a way where instead of repeating the same set of statements for 10 times, I'll just have only three. I'll just have only three statements and have some way to repeat the execution of these statements for given number of times. Now this is like, I say 10 times, you repeat it 10 times. I say 100 times, then you have to repeat this for 100 times, right? The same set of statements. Now, what if there was a way that can help us do the same thing in a much easier way? So that is where we use the power of loops. That is where we use the power of loops. So I'll just simply write a code here and then I'll try to help explain it. For I in range of 10. So which means I want to say like, here I'm going to just print I. So what I'm going to say is I am going to execute it. So let us see what it does. Right? So it has printed from 0 to 9, which means the same print I statement has been executed 10 times, starting from 0 to 9. Now in the same thing, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put my statements here. Okay. Now I said 10 times. This same set of statements are going to be executed for 10 times, right? So 10, 10, 20, 20, 20, 30, right? Do you get the point here? Once the execution of completed, that is executing this for 10 times, that's it. The program exits, right? This is where we want to use loops. So if we want to execute certain statements multiple times, right? Programmatically, we can use loops. We can use loops, right? Do you understand the concept and the power of it? So when it comes to the loops, when we want to execute a set of statements multiple times, then we can use loops. We can use loops, right? There are two kinds of loops. There are two kinds of loops. What is it? So there is something called definite loop. Another thing called indefinite loop. There are two kinds of loops. So a definite loop meaning the number of iterations, right? So one loop, so basically iteration meaning the number of times that you want to loop through that statement. Number of loops, I can also call it as loop. The number of iterations or iterations or loop, right, is known ahead of time, is already known to you, is known before execution of loop, before execution of loop. That is basically definite loop. So by the time you start executing the loop, you know how many times you have to loop through it. You know how many times you have to loop through it. For example, in the previous example, we used the range function, right? We said 10. So which means when I said 10, it only looped for 10 times because at the time of the iteration itself, we have given, right? It has to loop for 10 times. So by the time it started executing, it knows that it has to loop for 10 times. Right. Now, another thing is that in infinite loop or indefinite loop, meaning you never know how many iterations it will take, right? We know the number of iterations or loops is not known, is not known before execution, before execution. So example of a definite loop is for loop. Example is for loop. For indefinite, example is while loop. Right. Okay.